Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is the lesson notes presentation for Unit 2, Lesson 3. In this particular part of the lesson, we're going to be looking at the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution. We're actually spending a whole day or lesson on the First Amendment, mostly because it covers so much, probably more than what you might imagine. Before we get started, please let me ensure and make sure that you have the proper Google Doc open for today's lesson. Please remember to fill in the content and/or answer any key concept questions that appear throughout the lesson or the presentation. Let's get started. The Bill of Rights refers to the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. As a citizen of the United States, you can imagine that it's really important that you know your rights. Let's go ahead and begin looking at the First Amendment together. The First Amendment of the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution refers to the freedom of religion, assembly, press, to petition the government, and speech. Together, these 5 different domains will be the forefront of our focus for today's lesson. We're even going to be looking at specific case scenarios and case studies that have entailed borderline violations of these rights and these limits. The First Amendment means that we all have the right to practice any religion we want to speak freely, to assemble or meet, to address the government by form of petition, and to publish newspapers, TV, radio, internet, also known as press. Together, this short list of outline basically informs us the way that we can interact with our government, our surroundings, and each other. Moreover, understanding what we can and cannot do under the First Amendment gives us more clarity of our roles as citizens. Let's look at freedom of religion. The Constitution states that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. What does that mean? Well, that basically means that in 2 clauses here, religion and government should never mix. The separation of church and state is invoked here, but also religion will never be imposed on anybody in a forcible fashion. There's 2 clauses that make this so, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. We're going to look at some do's and don'ts, cans and cannots right now. So Establishment and Free Exercise Clause often conflict with each other, but understanding the contours of what that means in the Constitution is going to be really important. For example, in schools, religion as an issue is the most prevalent. If a student raises his or her hand and says, "Teacher, can we say an opening prayer before this test?" Even if the student is really serious, and if the teacher is religious, if the teacher says, yes, it looks like establishment of religion in school, which is not necessarily allowed. But if a teacher says no, it is also denying a student free exercise of freedom of religion. So this can get a little complicated. In the Establishment Clause, government cannot promote religion. Even though many people might say that we are a Christian nation and have Christian sentiments in our doctrines and in our practices, the Establishment Clause reigns true. Here are some basic cans and cannot. We can teach about religions in school. We can allow voluntary prayer in many examples. We can transport students to a religious school. We can read the Bible for culture or literacy content, but we cannot set a state religion. Government cannot order a prayer. We cannot teach religious doctrines in the school. And we cannot pay seminary teachers. We cannot teach creationism, which is the belief that God did in fact create the earth. As you can see, the line between what you can and cannot do may not be well defined as you might have thought. The Free Exercise of Religion clause is a little bit more complicated too when you dig a little bit deeper. For example, the free exercise focuses on the person. A person can choose whatever religion they want to. A person can lead a prayer in most examples. A person can ask questions about religion. And a person can worship pretty much whoever you want. However, in regards to the Free Exercise Clause, the individual cannot break the law and claim it was for religious beliefs or purposes. A person cannot raise children without proper education. And a person cannot deprave children of basic needs based off any type of religious belief. These things help us understand what we can and cannot do when we break it down nice and easy. Let's look at freedom of speech. The Constitution says that Congress shall make no laws abridging the freedom of speech. When we look at free speech, the individual can say any political belief that they want to. They can protest without getting out of control, of course. They can say things about someone that are true. They can technically burn the flag. They can say racist and hate slogans. And they can embody this moment here down here or motion where free speech means someone might say something you disagree with. So in other words, disagreement is common, especially when you're an adult and you engage with other people about the political process. So you can freely disagree with your peers. But there are limits on the individual and the person too, which I want to explain to you right now. You cannot threaten to blow up airplanes, schools, or the president. You cannot create too much social chaos that will be disturbing the peace. You cannot engage in extremely crude language in a public forum. You cannot show disrespectful, vulgar language in schools. And you cannot commit hate crimes. So clearly, in regards to freedom of speech, the lines might be a little bit more defined. However, we're going to be going over some situational context which might make you think otherwise. Now let's talk about the freedom of the press. The Constitution says that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the press. But what does that mean? Well, in regards to freedom of the press can print any political position that they want to. The press can make fun of people, especially politicians, and that they do, for both sides. The press can expose wrongs by the government. The press can say things that you might not agree with. They have every right to do so. However, the press cannot libel, which is intentionally injuring a person's reputation by false facts. The press cannot disclose defense security secrets or information. The press cannot detail how to make a certain type of weapon. This would obviously be dangerous for the masses too. Let's focus on freedom of assembly. Congress shall make no law abridging the people to peaceably assemble. But what are the rules and contours of this? When it comes to freedom of assembly, the individual can protest. The individual can have a parade or partake in a parade with a permit. The individual can parade chanting hate slogans, and an individual can, or a part of a gang, they can meet and congregate in public. An individual cannot protest by throwing rocks and breaking windows and harming private property. They cannot hang out on private land against the owner's will. This would be called loitering, which is a term you might have heard of before. And additionally, you cannot break curfew, especially if you're a teenager. Did you know that your particular environment and community has a curfew? Let's talk about petition of the government. The Constitution says that Congress shall make no law abridging the people to petition the government for redress of grievances. But what does that actually mean? Well, when it comes to petitioning the government, this means you may sue the government for wrongs or wrongdoings. And then, of course, the courts hear your case. You cannot be punished for exposing wrongs by the government. And the courts decide the wrongs, and typically the courts do a pretty good job of coming up with the verdict that is favorable to your rights. So as you guys can see, the First Amendment is somewhat complicated just in the sense that there's so much to be understood about our freedoms. When you take a closer look at our actions, our words, our thoughts, and our deeds, sometimes understanding what's allowed and not allowed is not so well defined. The rest of our lesson will focus on the contours of free speech and how the Constitution is still at work in regards to free speech. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope you found this to be helpful.